There is a very unique problem gacha games run into that you don't really see any other genre face, and that is the issue of hierarchy. The existence of buying characters presents an entire new dynamic that affects the psychology of how players value them. A gacha central design structure is also founded on this notion, resulting in a rarity system that we know all too well. Genshin Impact's units are categorized into two rarities, 4-star and 5-star. 5-star units are supposed to be the creme de la creme, among the top of their respective elements' rosters, and are also impossible to obtain through means other than pulling on their event banners, which I assume will always be the case. We've never had a 5-star character obtainable for free since the game's release. 4-stars, on the other hand, have been obtainable for free, and quite often too, but the increased commonality is due to their supposed lower capabilities. At the start of Genshin, however, the expectation that 5-stars were objectively better than 4-stars was inconsistent. Xingqiu, Bene, Xiangling, Sucrose, and Fischl have maintained their standing long after version 1, despite Keqing, Diluc, Qiqi, Jin, and to some extent Mona falling off in relevance. I'm sure this was not intended by miHoYo, as all 4-stars that came out since then were drastically toned down in power and/or versatility, especially following version 2 and even more in version 3. Despite receiving a comparable amount of attention, development, and building, 4-stars are notoriously underwhelming from a gameplay standpoint. So today, let's find out what the problem with 4-star characters is in Genshin Impact. Prevailing wisdom has 4-stars naturally lower in strength and numbers to balance out their lower rarity. That's common sense after all. Why would anyone in their right mind go after a 5-star character who's exponentially harder to obtain if 4-stars are just as strong as them? However, it doesn't always have to be a one-to-one comparison, and in well-designed gachas, it usually isn't. True, on average, 5-stars will have a higher stat line or be able to do more things, but ideally there should still be a fair share of representation regardless of rarity. Depending on the game, some gachas take star rarity to strength very literally, as in there should be no practical reason to use any 4-stars if you have 5-stars who fit similar purposes. An example of this is Final Fantasy Brave Exvius. Ever since the advent of Neovisions, which are essentially 8-stars, 99.99% of all units who cap out as 7-stars or less are never played because they're simply too weak or inefficient to be worth a spot on your team, even if they have abilities or tools that work with the situation at hand. Granted, a lot of 7-stars are given upgrades into Neovision, so you don't have to chase after only base envy units and can retrofit some of your old ones through a process called limit break. Limit breaking is seen very often in gacha games as a way for characters with a lower rarity to still compete with higher rarity ones, assuming the player is willing to invest the time and resources to make up that difference. Genshin doesn't have your conventional limit break system though. What they have are constellations, sequential upgrades to characters that grant passive boosts or new capabilities to existing talents. This was their way of showcasing limit break. Here's the thing, constellations are open-ended adjustments to a character, meaning there's no benchmark to what they provide. Some may be game-changing like Hutal's first constellation, others may be useless like Venti's first constellation. Additionally, unlike limit breaks, constellations do nothing to improve the character's base stats. Once they cap out, their numbers are fixed. There may be a constellation that increases your attack by say 20%, but your base attack is unchanged. The absence of a set standard means one character can be vastly improved through constellations while another will barely change. More often than not, that ends up being a bad thing. In most of my Why No One Plays episodes featuring 4-stars, an issue they all share is that they're just undertuned. Toma, Razor, Noelle, Yanfei, Kaya, Ningguang, Amber, though I haven't made one on Kaya or Ningguang yet. They all have very unique playstyles and fun experiences, but the numbers are simply far too low to compete with the top tiers. Constellations may offer substantial benefits to their gameplay and quality of life, but those constellations are also balanced around being 4-stars. Understandable, since you can C6 a 4-star with 1/10 of the capital it takes to C6 a 5-star. That being said, due to 4-stars being easy to max constellation, there's a predisposition that they're inherently meant to be played at C6. Therefore, it's almost like they have no constellations at all because those are expected to be part of their base kit. Few 4-star characters, if any, are evaluated at base. If you look through most tier lists, the majority of them will assume you have C4 or C6, so on and so forth. The need for constellations on 4-stars is further emphasized by how many feel like incomplete characters without them, which is another issue concerning Genshin's character design. If we're splitting hairs, that's also affecting 5-stars, but it's more pervasive in 4s. I'm by no means saying you need those constellations for them to function. Each unit is playable at base. But there's a lot of implicit pressure for 4-stars to have those constellations purely from how massive the gap between 5 and 4-stars is at a base level. I'd even go so far as to say that Xingqiu, Xiangling, Sucrose, and Fischl aren't anywhere near as good as we say they are with that C4 or C6. You might try to argue that Ascensions are this game's limit break, which is a valid point. They operate on the same basis. My counter-argument to that is, getting a 4-star character to level 90 is no easier than on a 5-star. Also, limit break and levels are not really the same thing. Overall, one of the big problems that 4-star units deal with is that they're directly competing with 5-stars in a gacha that exclusively ties effective power to rarity. 4-star characters are easier to get, therefore all aspects of their design are balanced with the expectation that a player will naturally unlock their constellations just by playing, and so their power budget automatically assumes C6, whereas for most 5-stars, their power budget starts at C0 and everything else afterwards is icing on the cake. At worst, you need C1 to unlock a 5-star character's full potential, but generally speaking, there is a hard divide between 4 and 5 stars that miHoYo refuses to close ever since version 1. Unlocking Constellation 6 doesn't make a 4-star character on par with a 5-star, but they're still evaluated on the same playing field. It's like Mario Party. I'm sure everyone has played Mario Party at least once in their lives. In that game, stars are infinitely more valuable than coins. You can have 999 coins and still be losing to a player with 0 but 1 star. That's how the dynamic between 4 and 5 stars feel like. I know I do this a lot, and some of you might say I should stop comparing apples to oranges, but one other gacha I play a lot is Blue Archive. In that game, the units come in different rarities as well, 1 star, 2 star, 3 star. All of them can be upgraded to 5 star and share the same cap. At times, it doesn't feel like there's any difference between a 1 or 2 star and a 3 star other than how rare they are. That's how I feel like rarity should be in gacha games, just that, rarity. In exchange for being easier to obtain, 4-star characters should begin weaker than 5 stars, but through enough work and investment they can make it to at least the same weight class as them. In fairness, 5 stars is supposed to be conceptually better than 4 stars, but that should only be through application, not numbers. 4 stars in Genshin are hamstrung by both worse numbers and less applications. They not only do less stuff than 5 stars, but the few things they can do are usually worse than if there was a 5-star equivalent. My stressing of the idea that 4 stars are unfairly expected to compete with 5 stars despite not having the same privileges is based on how Genshin's combat is structured. While the bulk of your experience consists of forming a party composition of 4 characters, only one of them is allowed on field at a time, in contrast to other games where all party members are on the field simultaneously. This influences a lot of factors, chief among them is who is allowed to be the frontrunner of your team. You'll notice that of the OP 4 stars quote-unquote, none of them are known for their on-field pressure. Bennett switches in, uses his burst, then switches out. Fischl, Xingqiu, and Xiangling as well. Now, the only reason Sucrose is on field in her Taser team is because the teams where she's your main DPS don't really care about who's on field. She just happens to be the one who stays out the most. This structure realistically slashes any chance of a 4-star on fielder / main DPS ever seeing the light of day. Ningguang, Razor, Noelle, Yanfei, they will never match 5 stars in power because their numbers are lower than 5 stars. Again, understandably so. The 4 stars who do perform well are those with off-field pressure, since off-fielding is basically the way you can have more active characters at a time. They're on the field without having to be on the field, if that makes sense. Xiangling's Beyblade, Xingqiu's Raincutter, Fischl's Oz, etc. I'm willing to bet money that miHoYo has taken notice of this. The last 4-star on-field damage dealer we had was, I believe, Yanfei all the way back in 2021. Every 4-star since then has been either a support or off-field DPS, which is basically someone who supports through damage, whether or not by their own choice. I should say that designing a game's roster in this way is not inherently a bad thing. If your approach to combat is to pull all of your resources into one person so they can carry your team, it only makes sense for you to use it on a 5-star, not a 4-star. In doing so, however, 4-star units end up cannibalizing each other. The handful of 4 stars who are good enough to contest 5 stars are the only ones players are going to want to use, leaving those who aren't for dead. Genshin's simplified combat system is both its greatest strength and greatest weakness. The lack of intricate combat mechanics, for now at least, put all units on the same playing field even though they shouldn't be. In the past year or so, I've gotten tons of criticism from players that are along the lines of you shouldn't compare X character to Y, they're not the same. And they're most certainly correct. Barbara is not the same as Kokomi, Xingqiu is not the same as Yelan, Chongyin is not the same as Shenhe, Yanfei is not the same as Kli, if we're talking about them on paper. In practice, the game forces them to be evaluated as if they are the same for the sheer fact that Genshin's combat is simplified, too simplified. Every single battle in this game is a beatdown rush, attack, attack, attack. There's hardly any semblance of strategy, rotations, coordination, what have you. Everything is a DPS check, even against bosses who have invulnerability periods or different phases. In the overworld, 99.99% of all enemies you encounter are nameless mooks who get two-shotted. Bosses may come with their own phases or attacks, but in the few situations they're invulnerable or require you to do something other than attack, they're mostly just tedious stalling tactics, and are usually universally addressable and not demanding of a specific type of character. The Golden Wolf Lord is a good case of this. After taking some damage, he generates a massive shield and is more or less invincible during this time. To make him vulnerable again, you have to inflict geo damage on the 3 Riptown skulls he throws around the arena. During this time, he gets to free fire on you, but his attacks are not threatening in the slightest. The hypostasis cubes are another example. They're only vulnerable when their core is exposed on the ground, and all of them have this survival check that you have to do something about lest they regain some HP. Most of the time though, they just need a specific element or weapon, and the character you bring doesn't even have to be good. What's unfortunate is that a lot of 4 stars have some really neat stuff about them. Candice and Chongyun offer Hydro and Cryo Infusion to their party respectively. That's something no 5 star has. Ningguang's Jade Screen blocks all projectiles that come in contact with it. There are some really nifty tools that can come in handy in a lot of situations, but all the game's challenging content is permanently available, ensuring that said content can't be designed to require a specific character or niche out of consideration for players who may not have that character if they just started out, for instance. All the same, they shouldn't make a full 180 and overgeneralize everything. That dumbs down every boss into a beatdown rush where it doesn't matter how you deal damage as long as you deal lots of it, and is a huge reason why Bennett, Xiangling, Xingqiu, Sucrose, and Fischl strong-arm virtually every other 4 star out of relevance. There's an option to use other 4 stars, but not a need for it. In my video last week talking about physical units, I mentioned how if there's no need, most players won't care enough to go the extra mile for something that achieves the same end result. Who cares about Candice or Chongyun's elemental infusions? Just get Hydro or Cryo damage outright. At this point, any player who's been around for a while has Ningguang. Considering she's basically the governor of Liyue, there should be more demonstrations of her power. They could have designed a boss or a dungeon that unleashes a huge barrage of projectiles that deal huge amounts of damage, forcing players to bring along someone with a metric ton of defense like Noelle, or someone who can, I don't know, block projectiles? They sort of try to add conditional bosses every now and then, such as a reputation bounty where the enemy in question is immune to elemental damage, but in turn takes more damage from something else. Most players brute force their way through them anyway. So because 4 stars are inherently meant to have less applications than 5 stars, to make them noticeable they usually have a specific niche, but without situations that demand those niches, there's no reason to use them. That's one of the fundamental rules of good game design. Just like how life without purpose is meaningless, applications without purpose are also meaningless, resulting in many 4 stars being meaningless. And it's not like constructing these mechanics are difficult, nor do they have to be hyper-specific. Say if we tried to find a way to make Candice more usable. Her main shtick is that she imbues her team with Hydro. In most cases, Hydro infusion is irrelevant since in any situation where Hydro is needed, you can just use regular Hydro damage like Xingqiu. As an answer to that, there can be a boss that can only be damaged by Hydro basic attacks, not abilities. Not only does this instantly scream Candice, but you can dust off your Barbara as well. There is Yalan, Ayato, Child, and Mona, but those are 5 stars that are far less likely for many players to have. Everyone has Barbara. Actually, speaking of Barbara, they brought her back into a somewhat relevant status through Nilo, since the Bountiful Chorus can run the risk of exploding your team, so you do need a Hydro healer. On that note, I'm not saying MiHoYo isn't trying to make their niche units, particularly 4 stars, more usable, but they're not doing enough of it, causing many highly beloved units to fall to the wayside as they don't have the right scenarios for their quirky tools to shine. One thing that Genshin doesn't have that most gachas do to encourage the use of multiple characters is boss rotation, like raids. If they ever decide to have weekly, bi-weekly, or monthly raids, creating bosses that require a specific mechanic will give opportunities for more 4 stars to be usable and therefore give players a reason to work on them instead of just using 5 stars over and over. If I had the opportunity to write up ideas for bosses, that would be so much fun. I can make a boss that requires a single massive burst of animo damage. Hazel, Jean, and Xiao are the only ones who can do that, as all the others attack in multiple strengths, or an electro version so you need Lisa's elemental skill for one giant nuke. How about a boss that can only be damaged by charge attacks from Catalyst users? Yanfei is a very good charge attack. The list goes on and on. Alternatively, if there was a boss or a dungeon that required you to make several parties at once. The name's escaping me, but there was that one dungeon where you had to send 2 units in at a time and you had to cycle through like 10 pairs. That's a good example. I just can't tell you how frustrating it is that Genshin has such amazing character design in such a simplistic game, but so many of its problems are because there's no content in this game that you can't complete by turning your brain off and bum rushing. It might sound like I'm of the school of thought that parrots we should make Genshin more hardcore, but in reality, these changes would make the game more satisfying for everyone, even casual players. It gets boring when you use the same 10 or so characters for weeks on end, yet at the same time, there's no incentive for you to invest resources into characters who are worse than those 10. Players need that extrinsic motivator to use all the unique 4 stars Genshin has to offer. Okay, that's gonna be it for today. Let me know your thoughts on this topic in the comments down below if you agree or disagree with my points. But if you enjoyed the video, please be sure to like and subscribe, really helps me out. Also follow me on Twitter at Vars, join my Discord server, and while you're here, check out my video on exclusive supports if you haven't yet. But till next time, thanks so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. Take care.